All right, here on RT, we are continuing to monitor that breaking news story here on the programme. For now, though, the world's leading intelligence agencies have found themselves chasing their own tails after Edward Snowden once again slipped through the global surveillance web that he exposed. The NSA whistleblower is now reported to be in hiding after sending off a plane packed with journalists to Cuba, at the same flight he was scheduled to be on. Let's now cross over to RT's Paul Scott, standing by at the airport where Snowden was last thought to be seen. Paul, good morning to you. Oh dear, I must say, you know, it's been rather entertaining watching the media frenzy around the world. The plane crammed with journalists flying to Cuba, but oh dear, there's no Edward Snowden.
Yes, it's only right, isn't it, Rory, that a story such as this about espionage should be shrouded in such mystery. The only thing that we know for certain is that Edward Snowden's exact location is unknown. Now, the White House have suggested that they still believe that Edward Snowden is in Moscow. Now, whether that means he's in transit still in the airport terminal building behind me, at the Ecuadorian embassy, of course, Ecuador, the country that he is seeking political asylum, or at another location, we simply do not now know. Now, all reports point to the fact that he did, in fact, arrive here at Sheremetyevo Airport on Sunday at around 5 o'clock in the afternoon on an Aeroflot flight inbound from Hong Kong. Of course, Hong Kong was where he was in hiding for a fortnight after blowing the whistle on the NSA surveillance operation. But he has not been spotted since. Now, Russia's security service, the FSB, say they do not know where he is, and the lack of sighting is causing some on blogging websites and social networks to question whether he even set foot in Russia at all in the first place. Another thing that we do know is that Ecuador is the country where he is seeking political asylum, and it was widely surmised that that was going to be his target destination, his final intended destination. But with WikiLeaks pulling the strings and organising the whole thing, some are now questioning whether it has all been an elaborate decoy, a decoy so elaborate, in fact, that, as you say, half the world's press have flown on an empty plane to Cuba, a plane not containing Edward Snowden. Now, at the moment, it is fair to say that Snowden is ahead of the game. He's keeping not just the world's press, but also the American authorities guessing as to his exact whereabouts. But you get the feeling, with the world watching, that Snowden's next move in this game of cat and mouse could be crucial.
All right, indeed. RT's Paul Scott at Moscow's Sheremetyevo Airport. Thank you. Well, it's good to have you with us here on RT. RT's Yegor Piskunov, he was also on the Havana-bound flight that Edward Snowden was due to take. He told us of the, what should we say, the wild confusion on board when the press suddenly realized the whistleblower had given them the slip.
I just got off this plane. We just landed in Havana, coming from Moscow, a 13-hour-long flight. And, well, what can I say? Back in Sheremetyevo, up to the very last point, everyone was still expecting Edward Snowden to show up to board that plane. Even when we were sitting there, the whole plane was packed. Even when they locked the doors and it was taxiing away to take off, still, everyone was waiting for him, at least to find him on that plane. And when we were allowed to get up from our seats, we went to the seats 17A and C where they were supposed to be sitting and saw that they were empty. Some journalists were actually looking for them inside the airplane, checking bathrooms, checking places where Mr. Snowden could have been hiding since the very beginning. It seemed almost 100% that he was going to take this flight. Increased security in the airport, crowds of journalists were additional factors boosting these expectations.
Well, although the dozens of journalists after the scoop of the year were left disappointed, others did make the most out of it. And one of those is seat 17A, that was booked for Snowden, that made the very most of its 15 minutes of fame on Twitter. In the first tweet, the seat without a passenger seemed upset, writing, "I feel empty." It was also a little annoyed that it couldn't make conversation with the seat next to it because a BBC reporter was sitting on it. 17A was also a little apprehensive of all the angry journalists and frankly irritated by no sign of the drinks trolley. Well, here at RT, we did manage to speak to Daniel Ellsberg, another prominent American whistleblower. He did expose Pentagon Papers back in '71. That was detailing Washington's controversial decision-making process during the Vietnam War. He believes very few people, at the end of the day, can measure up to Snowden's sacrifice.
I think he would be in much the same cell as Bradley Manning, if not in the same cell at Quantico, and he could be, under the National Defense Authorization Act, he could be in military detention. But even if not, he would be in a jail cell somewhere as incommunicado as Bradley Manning has been for the last 3 years. So I think he was very wise to make his disclosures outside of this country. And I think that we should be listening to what he has to say, because what so far I've heard him say is very eloquently put and shows much better judgment than those of his colleagues who went along with this clearly unconstitutional practice that they were all participating in. I would say that John Kerry's calling him a traitor is disgusting. He's no more a traitor than I am and I am not, although that word was used about me by a president and a vice president, both of whom, by the way, lost their office for criminality, Nixon and Agnew. I think he's in the tradition of Nathan Hale, the first American to be convicted of, tried, in fact, for giving secrets to Americans. He said, "I regret that I have but one life to give for my country," because his country was America, and he was hanged by the British. He was a spy for George Washington. I think that Edward Snowden has shown a willingness to give his life for this country, and there's no American, I believe, who more deserves to be honored at this moment.
And in the meantime, Washington has showered threats and ironic remarks towards the countries which Snowden has used as stepping stones on his quest to freedom. It's warned China of the consequences of allowing the 30-year-old to flee to Russia, while venomously hinting that both Moscow and Beijing are far from being bastions of free speech. RT's Gaine Chichikan has more.
The White House says Hong Kong officials had received Washington's request to arrest Snowden and still made, quote, a deliberate choice to let him go. So Washington clearly takes it as a snub from China. Here's the president's press secretary.
We are just not buying that this was a technical decision by a Hong Kong immigration official. This was a deliberate choice by the government to release a fugitive despite a valid arrest warrant, and that decision unquestionably has a negative impact on the U.S.-China relationship.
We remember that in response to the U.S. request to arrest Snowden, the government of Hong Kong issued a statement saying that the documents the U.S. provided did not fully comply with the legal requirements under Hong Kong law. But also, in that same statement, the government of Hong Kong said they wanted more information from the U.S. government about the hacking of computer systems in Hong Kong by U.S. government agencies. And that was one of Edward Snowden's revelations. Snowden gave China a great political counter-argument to U.S. constant accusations against China. Now, the U.S. can't accuse China of cyber attacks without being accused of hypocrisy. So there is an interesting dynamic behind all this. The U.S. wanted China, or the semi-autonomous government of Hong Kong, to give them the man who had leaked U.S. secrets. But one of those secrets is about activities of the U.S. government against China. So it's possible that China's dilemma was to either thank Edward Snowden or to arrest him. Hong Kong says they've done everything in accordance with their laws. Now, as far as Russia, Edward Snowden has been in transit in Russia, and Russian authorities say they have no legal authority to arrest him. But U.S. politicians and pundits on television use what seems like a Cold War rhetoric to present Russia and China as the enemies that Snowden is helping. And the imagination of some journalists is running wild as they joke about how Edward Snowden is being briefed by the Russian president. And one former official, also on one of the news channels, said Russia and China are going to use this to embarrass the U.S. One should argue it's Snowden's revelations that embarrass the U.S., not Russia or China. But that's exactly what's happening now. U.S. policymakers are doing everything possible to divert attention away from Snowden's revelations, and certainly one way of doing this is to present it as a Cold War style cat and mouse chase. That way you have U.S. media now almost cheering for Edward Snowden's capture, although just a little while ago some of the same journalists were grateful for a greater public awareness of the fact that the U.S. government is spying on millions of people who've done nothing wrong. Snowden, of course, has no illusions as to what lengths the U.S. government will go to catch him. Edward Snowden also said it's not government persecution that he fears most. He said, the greatest fear that I have about the outcome of these disclosures is that nothing will change. From how it's developing, it doesn't look like things will change for Americans anytime soon. But for the world, the implications of his revelations could be significant. For example, the fact that the U.S. now can't accuse China of cyber attacks without being accused of hypocrisy.
Washington correspondent Guy Chachan. Charlie McGrath, one of the founders of an anti-mainstream news wire, Wide Awake News, he believes the US should try and give up lecturing the rest of the world.
We saw Carney play it out today, Press Secretary Carney, talking about we demand this and we don't accept that. You know, we're not talking to children. Although it seems that this government, in its quest for ultimate power, wants to talk down its nose to the world as if they are children. But the fact of the matter is, these are sovereign nations. If China wants to not send him back to the United States because they don't want him to endure political prosecution, then they apparently have every right not to. The government's upset. The power brokers in Washington, D.C. are very upset. The security industrial complex is very upset. This is obvious by their action. But everything that they're doing is trying to smoke and mirror, shift the blame, shift the focus from the information that's been revealed until onto the person who revealed the information. It really is, like I said, I hope he makes it to where he's going standing upright and breathing. But the true story here is the decimation of personal freedom inside of this country, the United States.
And Ecuador has reportedly given Snowden refugee papers while it considers his asylum request. But its foreign minister has declined to reveal where the whistleblower is. Snowden's trek to Ecuador is being organised by WikiLeaks, according to its chief, Julian Assange. And more on this now to RT's Polly Boyka.
Julian Assange was saying that they are in contact with Edward Snowden and the WikiLeaks legal representative travelling with him. They've said that they are both healthy and in good spirits and in a secret location that they can't disclose. Now, they've spoken a lot about the very bullying and what they call the threatening behaviour of the US administration in relation to a number of nations through which Edward Snowden has been reported to be travelling, the fact that they've been demanding for his extradition. Now, WikiLeaks have said that Edward Snowden is not a traitor, as the US Secretary of State was calling him earlier, but he is a hero. As we know, WikiLeaks have been assisting Edward Snowden both with his asylum request to Ecuador as well as with legal representation. So we're going to be following this story as it develops for you from London.
RT's Polly Boyka there.